Yeah, hello, Mohammed. You got interested recently in the mathematician Ramanujan, one of the most famous Indian mathematicians, probably. Why is Ramanujan so interesting and important for you?
Srinivasa Ramanujan was an Indian mathematician born on the 22nd of December 1887, and he was really important to me because he was mainly a self-taught genius who had no formal training in pure mathematics.
So you say that Ramanujan was self-taught. How did Ramanujan, in a way, discover that he was a mathematician?
He came from a poor background in India, so he did not have a lot of resources. He would find a book called A Synopsis of Elementary Results in Pure and Applied Mathematics, and this book was a book full of theorems and proofs, and he would spend his time trying to find out the proofs for these theorems himself, and that's how he would develop his early mathematical knowledge. This book would also go on to be a huge influence on his writing style mathematically.
Mm-hmm. So he then, as far as I understand, got in contact with G.S. Hardy. So what did he do to get noticed by G.S. Hardy, who was one of the most famous and eminent mathematicians at that time?
Yes, he ended up writing letters to G.S. Hardy, who was a professor at Trinity College, Cambridge. And at first, Hardy was not convinced about Ramanujan himself. So Ramanujan spent a lot of time writing those letters. And eventually, Hardy saw the intellectual powerhouse that Ramanujan was, and he would extend a scholarship for him to come from India to England so that he could study at Cambridge.
So that sounds a bit like a miracle. How did Ramanujan manage to convince Hardy that he was, in fact, one of the most brilliant mathematicians of that time?
Ramanujan had a brilliant skill where most of his mathematics was all intuitive and it was all creative. His theorems were ahead of their times. His work on infinite series and number theory would go on to shape the 20th century mathematics. He was a child prodigy in mathematics, so he hardly found out from his letters and from the theorems that he would submit to Hardy that there was a genius here.
So you say that Ramanujan was really intuitive. Did he also manage to prove all of his results, or was he mainly someone who said, yeah, I kind of think that this is true, and I actually have no real idea where this comes from?
He would end up proving most of his theorems. One of his last notebook, which was a collection of theorems that he wrote in the last year of his life, from 1919 to 1920, was actually found by another Cambridge mathematician, George Andrews, in 1976. And then this book would then go on to be published, where George Andrews and his fellow colleagues would prove the theorems that Ramanujan would write in his last year.
So there was a miraculous notebook that in the end contained a lot of more results than were known until the end of Ramanujan's life.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So could you maybe tell us a bit more about what kind of mathematics Ramanujan worked on? So you mentioned infinite series and number theory. So do you have something like an example of what Ramanujan has shown?
He worked on a lot of different fields in mathematics. His work on number theory and composite numbers, and especially number properties, especially for prime numbers. He'd also work on, as you said, infinite series, where he would produce new and elegant series for 1 over pi.
So when you think about our mathematics program at LJMU, do you have an idea which module might maybe touch on some of the work that Ramanujan did?
Yes, I first came across Ramanujan in my first year module. It was a module about number theory, learning about prime numbers. So that's where I first came across Ramanujan. And I think his life story, characterized by his intellectual achievement and also personal and professional challenges, are also very key, inspiring in his life story.
So both of the life and the personality of Ramanujan were probably something that became a lot more well known than for many other mathematicians. So a few years ago there was a movie about Ramanujan. Can you say a bit about the movie?
Yes, Ramanujan became one of the only few mathematicians in history to have a movie named after them. This movie was called The Man Who Knew Infinity, and it came out recently. And it was a brilliant movie that tried to depict the life story and how much of a genius Ramanujan was as a mathematician and then also as a person as well.
Okay, so if I say, okay, one sentence, one statement about Ramanujan to summarize what he was for you maybe, or for mathematics, what would you say?
Ramanujan was a genius who came from a truly a poor background, who would then find himself being one of the best mathematicians the 20th century has ever seen. He had a truly brilliant, intuitive and creative approach to mathematics that not many mathematicians are born with.
So in a sense, Ramanujan, a genius mathematician against all odds.
Exactly.